The sun moved slower that summer. Mornings arrived with the scent of sea salt and pine and the sound of waves brushing gently against the shore. In the quiet seaside town in the south of France, life still clung to peace, as if the war, raging elsewhere, had forgotten this corner of the world. Isabelle walked barefoot along the sand, her light cotton dress brushing against her legs in the warm breeze. She was 17, with hazel eyes that held a softness most often found in dreamers. Her days were filled with books, long conversations with her grandmother on the terrace, and afternoons that drifted lazily like the sea itself. But that morning, something in the air felt different. A stillness, perhaps, or a beginning. She first saw him by the flower cart. He was leaning on a bicycle, gazing out at the horizon as if trying to understand it. Tall, with sun-kissed skin, tousled dark brown hair, and a quiet focus in his expression. He wore a linen shirt, sleeves rolled, and when his eyes met hers, grey but warm, she felt the hush of something important. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" he said in fluent French, though his accent hinted at the north. "It feels like time slows down here." Isabelle nodded, smiling shyly. "Sometimes I think the war has forgotten this place." He introduced himself as Gabriel, visiting from Bordeaux with his family, staying at his uncle's summer house. He'd been here before the war changed everything. She found herself listening more closely than usual. Something in the way he looked at the sea made her want to look at it too, with new eyes. That was their first meeting, but it wouldn't be the last. Over the next few weeks, they crossed paths again and again. At the market, on the shore, in the quiet corner of the library where she liked to hide from the midday heat. They talked about everything: books, old songs, dreams. Gabriel confessed he wanted to study philosophy. Isabelle told him she wrote letters she never sent, just to get her feelings out. The silences between them became sweeter than most words. Summer stretched like golden thread, and in its warmth, something tender bloomed. Isabelle didn't realize it yet, but a part of her had already chosen to wait for him, no matter what would come next. The warmth still lingered in the air, but the summer had started to fade. The light shifted. Shadows stretched longer across the streets. The once lively boardwalk had grown quieter, and the breeze now carried a chill that whispered of change. Isabelle felt it. Something was coming. She found Gabriel waiting for her at the old stone bench by the pier where they had shared so many sunlit moments. But that day, he wasn't smiling. He sat beside her, quietly. Then, with a voice softer than the sea, he said, "I've been called." Isabelle didn't speak. She couldn't. It felt as though the entire world had held its breath. Gabriel explained he had to leave in 2 days. The trains were filling with young men. There were no choices, no delays. He was going. "You'll come back, won't you?" she asked, eyes fixed on the horizon. He nodded once. "I have to. I need to." He took her hand, warm, trembling, and held it between both of his. "I don't know what's waiting out there, but here, with you, this was the best time of my life." Isabelle's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "Then come back, so we can start our real story." The station was crowded. Mothers, sisters, lovers, holding tightly to boys who now wore uniforms instead of linen. Shirts. Isabelle stood among them, the soft blue scarf she'd worn the day they met clutched tightly in her hands. Gabriel stood beside the train. He looked older in uniform, his shoulders straighter, his expression more guarded, but his gaze, when it met hers, was full of something unshakable. They didn't speak much. Words felt small, fragile. He embraced her like he needed to memorize her shape. She kissed his cheek slowly, holding back tears, and then he climbed aboard. Isabelle didn't move. She stayed there, watching until the train became a blur of smoke and steel. She didn't cry. She only pressed the scarf to her lips. and whispered to no one but the wind, "Come back to me, Gabriel." In the first days after Gabriel left, Isabelle measured time in envelopes. Every morning she rose early, wrapped herself in her wool shawl, and walked to the mailbox. Even knowing it was too soon, she checked. Hope doesn't always listen to reason. Then she would return home and write. She wrote long letters full of little things about the shape of the clouds that day, the scent of the pine trees, the sea's moods. She told him about her mother's garden, the fresh bread from the corner shop, the way she still wore the scarf he had touched. "Are you eating well? Do you still dream of the beach? I miss your silence." Each letter ended the same way, "With all my love until you return." Isabelle. She sent them faithfully. At first, the absence of replies didn't bother her. The army was chaotic. Soldiers were busy. But then, the first envelope came back, stamped in red, undeliverable. Her breath caught. She sent another. It returned too, and another, and slowly, the silence became heavier than any answer. Winter crept into the village. The beach stood empty, the sea gray and distant. The sound of laughter vanished from the streets, and inside Isabelle's house, even the ticking of the clock seemed louder than before. She still wrote letters, but they became shorter, sharper. "Say something, anything. Are you alive?" "You promised." Some letters she never sent. They stayed in a box beneath her bed, folded, sealed, full of things too fragile to release. The townspeople had stopped asking about Gabriel. Isabelle heard the whispers when she passed. "Poor girl, still waiting. Maybe he's gone." She didn't answer them, but every morning she still opened the mailbox, because sometimes hope is just another form of love that refuses to die. Winter came without mercy. Snow blanketed the village like silence made visible. The trees stood bare, and the sea crashed in dark, irregular rhythms. Even the birds had gone. Isabelle moved through it all, like a shadow, quieter, thinner, still, holding on to a name no one else dared to mention anymore. It was during this time that Hauptmann Victor Weiss arrived, a German officer stationed in the old hotel that had once housed sun-kissed tourists. Tall, with graying blonde hair, a smooth command of French, and a voice that never needed to rise. He was different from the others, composed, educated, unsettlingly kind. At first, she ignored him, but he noticed her. A few words exchanged at the bakery, a slight nod near the post office, and then a quiet conversation beside the churchyard wall. "You walk like someone carrying ghosts," he told her once gently. "You read too much into strangers," she replied. He smiled and kept appearing. One morning, Victor offered her a position helping with translations, letters from prisoners, documents from occupied regions. Her language skills were uncommon. In the village, it would be safe, discreet. She could help. She would be protected. Isabelle refused, but when she told her mother, the answer came swiftly. "Do you want to starve for someone who might never come back?" The words pierced, but they stayed. A week later, Isabelle entered the hotel. She began working quietly, typing, filing, translating. Victor was never inappropriate, always polite, but always watching, and gradually she stopped pushing him away. He brought her tea on cold mornings, lent her books in both French and German, spoke of music, art, cities she'd never see. He never mentioned Gabriel, but his silence said everything. One evening, he walked her home beneath falling snow. At the door, he paused. "There's a world beyond waiting," he said, eyes steady. "You deserve warmth, not memories." Isabelle didn't answer. She stepped inside, locked the door, and cried. Upstairs, in a drawer she hadn't opened in weeks, lay the soft blue scarf. She held it in her hands for a long time, and for the first time, she wasn't sure who she was holding on to anymore. The snow no longer felt pure. It covered the village like a hush that pressed against the windows and hearts of those still waiting for peace. Isabelle walked its narrow streets with careful steps, not because of the ice, but because of the stairs. They watched her now. The shopkeepers, the women at their windows, the same neighbors who once smiled now glanced away, or worse, lingered with pity. Whispers followed her like wind. She works for them. She traded love for comfort. Poor girl. Still waiting? She said. Nothing, but every word carved a little deeper. At the hotel, Victor treated her no differently. Polite, measured, present. He continued to bring her books, to talk of life before uniforms. He never pressed, but his presence filled spaces where Gabriel used to live, and Isabelle was tired. Tired of cold mornings, tired of empty mailboxes, tired of holding breath she no longer believed would be returned. One afternoon, she received a letter from a childhood friend, one of the few who hadn't yet turned away. They talk about you, Isabelle. They say things I don't want to believe. Tell me it's not true. Tell me you haven't forgotten him. She read the letter 3 times, then burned it. Not out of anger, but because she didn't have an answer. That night, Victor knocked on her door. He brought wine, 2 glasses, and a question. I'm leaving soon, transferred to Lyon. I could take you with me, not as a prisoner, as someone I care for. He placed the glass on the table without touching her. Think about it. Warmth, food, safety, a future. Isabelle looked at him. He was not cruel. He had not lied. He offered what so many women would have accepted. But then she glanced at the drawer, the scarf, the letters, the boy who had once kissed her hand and promised to return, and with a steady voice she said, I already have someone. Victor didn't argue. He simply nodded, left the wine, and walked away. Isabelle stayed at the table long after the door closed, her hands trembling, and when she finally rose to leave, she whispered into the silence, Come back to me, Gabriel, please, before I forget the sound of your voice. Spring had not yet arrived, but the snow began to melt in timid patches. The rooftops dripped slowly in the morning light, and the air no longer stung quite as sharply. Still, Isabelle felt cold. She wandered through the town with no purpose. Her hands buried deep in the pockets of her coat, her heart heavy and restless. Something inside her was shifting, not loudly, not suddenly, but like a tide turning beneath the surface. Without knowing why, she walked to the beach. The same beach, where Gabriel had first laughed as the waves touched their feet, where they'd talked about books and philosophy and dreams that now felt too fragile to name. She sat down on the damp sand, shoes forgotten, and let the wind wrap around her like a question. She remembered the way he looked at her, the way he had held her fingers just a little longer than necessary, the way he had said, I'll come back, with such quiet certainty. And then she remembered the dress, the soft blue dress she had worn the day he left. She rushed home, pulled open the old trunk beneath her bed and found it, still folded, still faintly smelling of sea and sun. She held it close to her chest as if it could still remember his arms. The tears came slowly, not violent, not bitter, just full. She sat on the floor, blue fabric pressed to her heart, and felt something open, something she had locked away for too long. Later that evening there was a knock, not at the door, but inside her. A thought, a voice. Stay. Wait one more day. She lit a candle and placed the dress carefully across the chair, and for the first time in months, she wrote a letter again. No address, no envelope, just words. I don't know if you're alive, but if you are, know that I'm still here, not because it's easy, but because I believe you are too. She folded the note and placed it in the box with all the others, and as the candle burned low, Isabelle finally slept. The war was drawing to a close, or so the newspapers said. Allied troops advancing, cities liberated, flags returning to balconies. The village began to breathe again, cautiously, as if afraid the calm might be broken at any moment. But for Isabelle, nothing had changed. No name, no letter, no Gabriel. She moved like someone wrapped in glass, careful, silent, waiting to shatter. She no longer answered questions. She no longer searched the crowds. But every night, before bed, she opened the drawer, touched the scarf, and whispered the same words. Please, let him come back. One afternoon in March, she climbed to the attic, a room she hadn't entered in years. Dust danced in the sunlight. Forgotten trunks lined the walls. In the farthest corner, she found an old wooden box. Inside, black and white photos. Her grandmother as a girl, smiling beside a young man in uniform. He had never returned from the First World War. Isabelle stared at the photograph for a long time, and then she cried, not only for him or her grandmother, but for all the women who had waited, for all the stories that had ended without closure, for the ones who had folded, letters they would never send, and for the part of her that now wondered, was she one of them? That night she almost packed a suitcase. She thought of Lyon, of Paris, of anywhere but here. But as her hand reached for the blue dress, something inside her stopped. Not because it was logical, not because she was brave, but because her heart, bruised and bruising, still pulsed with one truth: he hadn't said goodbye. Not properly, not forever. The next morning, Isabelle walked to the beach. She sat on the cold sand, arms around her knees, and watched the sea breathe. For a long time, she said nothing. And then, with eyes full of sky and salt, she whispered, I don't know if you'll come back, but if you do, I'll still be here. The day began like any other. A gentle sun peeked through the curtains. The breeze carried the scent of damp earth and wildflowers. The village was stirring, cautiously alive again. Isabelle left the house just before noon. She wore her old coat, her steps unhurried, and in her pocket, the blue scarf, soft with time. She wasn't expecting anything. Not today. She had stopped expecting a long time ago, but when she turned the corner by the old flower stall, she froze. There, standing near the wall, under the budding trees, was a man, thinner, paler, his uniform wrinkled and faded, a limp in his walk, scars on his face, but his eyes were still Gabriel's. Her breath caught, the world disappeared, her heart, bruised by months of silence, exploded in her chest, and then she ran. Gabriel! She cried, the name tearing from her throat. He looked up, stunned, disbelieving, and began to move toward her, slow at first, then faster. Despite the pain in his legs, they collided in the middle of the cobblestone street. It wasn't graceful. It wasn't gentle. It was desperate, raw, two bodies clinging like they had survived a storm and had nothing left to lose. You're here, she sobbed, her voice breaking. Gabriel held her tightly, burying his face in her hair. I dreamed of this every night, when it was too cold, when it was too loud, when I wanted to give up. I thought of you. Tears streamed down both their faces. She kissed his face, his hands, every scar. He kept whispering her name like it was the only word he remembered. I thought you were gone, she choked. I almost was, he answered. But I held on because I needed to see you again, just once. That was enough. No, she said, pressing her forehead to his, not once. You came back. Now we begin again. They stood there, holding each other, long after the street had emptied, and for the first time in a long, long time, she knew she had been right to wait. This was never just a war story. It was a story about waiting, about a woman who chose hope again and again, even when the silence screamed louder than any goodbye. Isabelle didn't wait because she was weak. She waited because some promises are stronger than time. And Gabriel didn't survive because he was lucky. He survived because he carried her in his memory. Through every gunshot, every winter, every night he thought he wouldn't see. The dawn, when he returned, He brought with him the proof that love, real love, endures, even through war, even through doubt, even when no one else believes it still can. Because sometimes the bravest thing we can do is simply keep believing. Did this story touch your heart? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to know how it made you feel. Like this video so more people can discover this beautiful journey. Subscribe to the channel for more emotional and unforgettable love stories. New videos every week, because here, stories don't just entertain, they heal, they move, and they remind us that love is always worth waiting for.